Thank you, everyone, and thank you so much for coming to hear a little bit about Mughal jewelry. I'm so inspired to talk about it and enjoyed so much seeing the beautiful examples in the Mughal suite. I hope most of you have had a chance to see some of that work, and maybe some of the things we talk about today will help illuminate some of the pieces that you've seen. So just to orient us, the Mughal Empire was in its strength from 1530 to 1707 and covered much of what is now India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh. And there were three major phases to the development of the Mughal Empire. So the first ruler, Babur, that lavender section is the territory that he established. Then the next major front in the Mughal Empire was developed by Akbar and so that's around 1605, the yellow part added. And then the furthest extent was under Aurangzeb and that ended in 1707. Then after that, the Mughal Empire sort of fell into chaos. And one of the things that I wanted to mention about this is that Aurangzeb, part of the reason that he moved into southern India was because he wanted to gain control of the diamond mines in Golconda. So that was, there's this interesting relationship between jewelry and gems and political power that's part of the Mughal story. So here we're seeing some examples of male costume and jewelry, some of the major rulers of the Mughal period, Akbar the Great. In the first image, we're working out sound, so let me know if anybody can't hear very well, and Curtis will adjust things. Okay, so these are some really typical aspects of jewelry in this approximately 200-year period. There's a lot of use of pearls, a lot of use of emerald and ruby. So we'll see that predominate throughout the Mughal era. And turban ornaments are a major element that we see for the men. So they're often in these sort of paisley-shaped formations or feather plume-like formations. And we'll see some variety to that as we move along. Common motifs that you see in Mughal jewelry are birds, other animals, but birds are prominent. Floral motifs, vegetative motifs, a lot of vining leaves, and usually there is some kind of linear element, usually in gold. In the case of the archery ring on the upper right-hand corner, that is carved in jade and then enameled over it, and there are some set stones there. The lower left is a pendant. We're seeing the front and the back of that. So this is something that's very typical of Mughal jewelry, is that there is a side that is exquisitely beautiful and yet not seen when worn. So that on the left, those are emeralds and rubies set in what's called a kundan technique. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we move along. It's a typically Indian method of setting stones that does not involve bezels or prongs of any sort. It's just gold foil at room temperature, and then the stones are heated so that they bond with the gold foil, and that's what sets the gem. So on the reverse side, usually the imagery on the reverse side is related to that of the front. And here we have flowers and leaves, and that's in what's called meenkari, which is an enamel method that was brought to India from Persia during the Mughal period. We'll talk a little bit more about archery thumb rings. This is an element that came to India with the Mughals. It originated in China and then traveled through Persia and into the Indian subcontinent. So these are carved stone. The top one is garnet. The two there in the center are jade, and I believe the one on the bottom is also jade. And I think that this one on the bottom actually, we know, belonged to Shah Jahan, who was the son or grandson of Akbar the Great. Not quite sure. Okay. Grandson, that's what I thought it was. Grandson, thank you. Confirmation, yay! Okay, grandson of Akbar the Great. Yes, so Akbar and Shah Jahan, both of those rulerships were really important in terms of the spread and development of culture and the arts within the Mughal society. And they were known, both of them were known for religious tolerance and the spread of all sorts of really interesting crafts and artisanship. Okay, and actually, the gentleman on the right is the son of Shah Jahan, Dara Shikoh, who met an unfortunate end. We won't discuss that. His brother, the wretch, had him assassinated or something. Anyway, so we're seeing, again, on him a lot of the same kinds of jewelry elements that we saw in the earlier illustrations. Ropes of pearls, armbands. You can even see the archery thumb ring right there on his right hand. A lot of ornamentation on the turban. And even the plume has pearls that help weight it. I want to talk just briefly about the imagery that we see in textiles, in jewelry, in other objects in this Mughal period. There's a lot of floral and vegetative imagery, a lot of animal imagery. Some of it is hunt-inspired. And during the Mughal period, the patterning on textiles in particular changed drastically from kind of geometric forms to things that were more naturalistic, more floral and plant motifs, and they were done either by means of embroidery, as is this example, or woven, perhaps brocade, or with supplementary weft technique. So I've brought a textile that was given to me by a diplomat from Bangladesh, and that's a lovely example of a cotton textile with a supplementary weft motif that's woven into it. And when we get to some of the other clothing examples, you'll see that there's this beautiful, translucent, sheer quality to the clothing that the people in the images are wearing. And this gives you a good feel for what those textiles were like. So you're welcome to look at it after the talk. On the right here, we've got an image of a dagger and scabbard, also of the Mughal period, about 1615 or so, with floral imagery and a lot of bird imagery that worked into the handle. This is also a kundan technique with the inset rubies and emeralds. I want to talk briefly about the Buddha motif. We probably in the West know it as paisley. This is a motif that again came from Persia and was brought to India during the Mughal period. So this is something that actually came from what is now present-day Iran. On the left is an example of a 16th century Indian Mughal cashmere shawl fragment, and on the right is another textile fragment from the Calico Museum in Ahmedabad, both characteristic of the Bhuta motif in that it's floral. There's usually flowers and vegetative material in the image. And the word Bhuta actually is a Hindu Urdu word meaning flower. So this is one of the major sort of motifs of Indian art, Mughal Indian art. And we find it in architecture, textiles, enamel work, jewelry, all manner of things. And here's a wooden textile stamp from Isfahan, Iran, the Bhuta shape, the paisley shape that we're familiar with. And I want you to notice a couple of the floral motifs within the shape. There's some 5-petaled flowers and some sort of edging to leaf elements. And we're going to see those kinds of motifs repeated in the jewelry that we look at next. So you probably are noticing that edging that outlines the plume of each of these sarpech are very similar to the stamp that we just saw. So that kind of edging is really common in Mughal jewelry. The two images on the left here are from the 1700s. And the one on the right is much later. That is late Victorian to early Edwardian. So how do we know the difference? What can we tell that's different about the way that those images are constructed? I want to sort of direct your attention to the diamonds that are around the central ruby of the right-hand image. Notice how those are all faceted, little tiny facets to those diamonds. That's a very European way of doing of preparing the diamond. In the Mughal period, they preferred what was called table cut gems. So they were flat. There was very little faceting that was done at all. They were interested in clarity and purity of the stone, and very little faceting or shaping at all. So that's a way that you can start to discern the period of the piece. So when we see a lot of faceting, that's generally something that came from European approach to the manufacture of the gems. They're all sarpechas. They're all that plume-shaped form. There's always some kind of suggestion of a pendant element at the tip of the plume. And usually there is some kind of central gem with gems set around it. All of these are in the Kundan technique. So it's that non-bezeled method of setting the stone. Okay, we're going to move on to another sarpech. This is a Navaatna, which means, which involves 9 auspicious, try again. Okay, 9 auspicious jewels corresponding to the sun, the moon, planets. Each jewel is associated with a planetary deity and with the cardinal and intermediary directions. Again, on these, the purity of each stone is important to ensure the maximum efficacy for the wearer. These are considered talismans. They protect you from negative influences. And the idea is that all of the gems should be similar in size and shape, so that no single planetary deity has greater influence over the wearer than any other. And that the one exception is that central ruby which represents the sun, and that one can be larger. We're going to see some examples a little bit later on where Navaatna pendants were developed but then altered in some way. And we'll be able to tell how and why we think they're altered. So we're going to be sleuths as we look at some of these upcoming images. So the Navaatna can be placed in either a circular or a square configuration, or it can be placed like linearly on a necklace. And in that case, it would be that the ruby would be in the central position, and then it would be flanked on either side by 4 gems, for a total of 9. So here's a close-up of a Navaatna pendant, and we're missing the central ruby, right? The central sun gem. So, and you'll notice that there's some etching in that central emerald. So that's a Persian inscription that has been etched into the gem, and that's something that the Mughals did as well. So we'll look at examples of that coming up in a little bit. This idea of the Navaatna pendant is something that's characteristic of Buddhist, Hindu, Jain, and Sikh traditions, but then it was adopted by the Mughals. I should quickly just mention that each of these gems is related to a particular planet. So the diamond is for Venus, the pearl is for the moon, coral is for Mars, the emerald is for Mercury, topaz is for Jupiter, the sapphire is for Saturn, and then there's the cat's eye and the hessianite that complete the 9, and those 2 represent different nodes of the moon. Here we have another sarpatch. This one is entirely emerald. It dates from the mid-18th century, so mid-1700s, late Mughal period. And 78 of these emeralds are of Colombian origin. So there's quite a lot of international trade that's involved in some of the materials with which these beautiful jewelry pieces are made. So looking more specifically at jewelry and who wears what kinds of jewelry, we've got 2 examples here. On the left is a Maharaja Singh from Rajasthan, and that dates from about 1760, that image. So after the Mughal dynasty is starting to fall apart a little bit. There's a Sarapati gold headband, very similar to the headband that we saw in the previous image with the sarpatch, the sort of plume-shaped element. And my guess would be, from looking at this image, that that is probably Kundan set gemstones, likely to be emerald and possibly diamond. Where we're seeing gray is probably where the paint in the illustration has been damaged over time, and those were probably diamonds in the sarpatch and the headband. So then there are also, there's a feather plume with pearls at the base. There are 2 large metal oval ornaments, which we can't really tell what those are because there's been some damage to the paint. They're probably gold. Gold wire ear hoops with a central ruby flanked by 2 large pearls, a pearl neckband, a 4-strand pearl necklace, and then those necklaces are spaced with emerald beads. And then down the center front, you'll see these gold medallions that are sort of flower petal-like, and those are gold with emerald set. On the right, this is a little bit later image. This is from late Victorian to early Edwardian period, and that just gives you a little bit of an idea of some additional ways that the necklace configuration might be. And again, for him, earrings, turban ornaments, and there's a pearl and emerald sort of a sash, almost like a European baldric, across the chest. And I haven't done sufficient research to be sure, but I have a feeling that that could be something that's from British influence, because the British uniforms would have had that sort of element, though not in pearls. And so it could be that there's been some British influence in that particular element. The Kundan inlay work, it's 24 karat gold foil, and as I said, worked at room temperature. The gems are hot, and that's how they're heated, and that's how they're set into the gold. Most of these are Burmese rubies and Sri Lankan emeralds. Diamonds and agates also are used in the hilt of the sword there, or the dagger there. This idea of inlaying stones is something that's characteristic of the Mughal period, and it was used not just in jewelry, but also in architecture. So something that you're probably quite familiar with is the inlaid stonework of the Taj Mahal. And we also have beautiful examples of the inlay stonework in the Mughal suite here at Shangri-La. So those will be something lovely to look at again and appreciate. Typically, the architectural inlay work was done with malachite, tiger's eye, carnelian, and lapis lazuli. And also in the dome of the Taj Mahal, it used to be that there were precious gems in that dome area inset, but unfortunately over time those have all been vandalized away. This little bottle on the left dates from about the first third of the 17th century. It's lavishly inlaid with Kundan emeralds and rubies, primarily rubies. The dagger on the right has some Kundan work of inlaid gems, and quite a lot of gold is visible. So that's a little bit unusual compared to what we've been looking at. Here are a few pendants. This is an image that we haven't seen yet before. That sort of curved shape is meant to be a tiger's tooth, and that's actually an element that is used in many jewelry designs that we see in later periods. So that's a shape that's we're just coming across for the first time. This dates from the 17th century. It has 3 large emeralds. The 2 tiger teeth are diamonds. And on the reverse, this is a little bit unusual. It's a white ground to the enamel work, probably because there's so much white that's used in the front side of the piece. So just for artistic continuity, I think there is the use of that white ground. So that's a little unusual, with flowers and with trailing vines in that upper left. On the right is either a turban ornament or a tika. Tika is a pendant-like element that would be worn on the forehead for women. So probably the one on the right and the one down there in the center are tika. And we see the crescent moon element in both of them. Pearls, emeralds, diamonds. In the one in the lower section has obviously rubies as well. floral pendants were quite common, and most of these date from the first half of the 17th century, so early 1600s. So that's like just after Queen Elizabeth finished her reign, right? So just to give you a kind of a, don't flail, Cheri V, just to give you a feel for what's going on in Europe at the time. So these are all fabricated in gold, worked in the Kundun technique, and we see diamonds, rubies, and emeralds. Again, you'll notice the intent to keep uniform sizing in all of these elements as much as possible, that idea of that kind of visual balance, even though we're dealing with these remarkably contrasting colors. Green and red are extremely contrasting, right? But by keeping the elements in similar sizes, there's a lovely balance that's created in the piece. This is a beautiful example of the Meenkari enamel work, and you'll see that on the outer side of the bracelet is there are diamonds inset, right? And on the underside, it's the same kind of motif, but it's done entirely in enamel work. Something that I find quite interesting I want to point out is this idea of bordering. So in the case of the bracelet, we've got 2 pearl borders of different sizes, right? The larger pearls and then that smaller line of pearls. And we've got a similar kind of design motif happening in that carpet. So we've got the 2 yellow borders that have circular motifs in pink in them, and then the smaller blue borders on either side of that. So this sort of echoing we see quite frequently in Mughal art. And in fact, if you look at that window behind us, and I suppose the one behind me too, we've got that same idea of a border that is bordered by a narrower element, right? So that's, and if we look at the tile motif above the doorway there, it's the same idea, right? So this is a characteristic that we see across Mughal decorative arts, where we've got an even field of motif. In that case, it's these overlapping circles that create stars, and then there's a border with a border, right? So that you can start to notice that kind of proportion throughout the decorative arts of the Mughal period. I talked a little bit earlier about this idea of inscribed gemstones. This is a ruby that is about 250 carats. Yeah. It was given to one of the Mughal emperors by a ruler in Iran, and we have the 6 owners of this gem their names are inscribed, and the dates of the ownership, or when they received it, are inscribed on the gem. So that's something that is characteristic of really impressive gemstones within this period. So this is a Mughal ruby and emerald set. There's enamel used on the back side of that pendant. And you'll notice again, fairly early in the Mughal period, because we've got fairly flat, clear emeralds throughout the necklace, right? So that's probably 1700s. We'll turn to the ladies now a little bit. Let's see what ladies are wearing. So here's a beautiful example of the kind of fabrics that I was talking about here. This very sheer fabric that, so these are 17th century Mughal miniatures. And now zeroing in more on the jewelry that ladies would be wearing. On the left is a portrait of the Mughal Empress Nur Jahan. So she dates late 1500s to mid 1600s. The portrait was probably done in 1725-ish or so posthumously. The portrait was done posthumously. So she's wearing a turban. That's rather an unusual thing for a woman to be wearing. She would have to have permission from the emperor to wear a turban. Her turban is ornamented with pearls and a large emerald, number of rubies, possibly some sapphires. Her earring, you'll notice, has a row of pearls going up over the ear. That was to help alleviate the weight of the earring so that it would be more comfortable to wear. She has necklaces, she has tasseled armbands down here with a number of pearls, bangles, rings, alternating, you'll notice, emerald, ruby on the earring, on the rings. On the right is a bejeweled maiden with a parakeet, dating from about 1670. You'll notice that she has henna on her fingers. Each finger is adorned with a diamond ring. She has cuff bracelets that may be in the Kundan style, ropes of pearls, emeralds, rubies. She has a nose ring, earrings similar to the ones that we saw on that Raja earlier, right? Same kind of idea there with the pair of pearls on either side of a gem. She's wearing a tika on her forehead with a row of pearls that is helping to support the weight of that. So these two ladies are from the 1600s to 1700s. As we move a little bit forward, you'll notice that the jewelry has developed a little bit. I couldn't find a date for this particular image on the left, but I suspect that it is probably from the early 1800s, just based on the artistic style of the portrait. On the right is Mumtaz Mahal. She was the favorite wife of the Emperor Shah Jahan, and she's the lady for whom the Taj Mahal was built. So Mughal jewelry tended to have these strands of pearls, right? Pendant elements. There were tremendous techniques that happened during the Mughal period and that were shared. So here's an example of something where the Mughal methodology of enamel work was applied to a traditional regional jewelry element. This is a torque that would have been probably a Rajasthani element that was worn not in the courts but in the communities, and probably would not have been made out of gold. So Mughal craftsmen inspired goldsmiths outside the confines of the court to produce jewelry that combined Mughal ornamentation and sort of a refinement of elements with traditional shapes. And this is an example of that. So now we're looking at things where there's a kind of a fusion of styles that begins to happen. This is an example that dates from the Victorian period, and it probably would have been worn by maybe the wife of a landowner or merchant, as opposed to a lady of the court. And we know that based on the shape of the piece. But you're seeing, again, those floral images, the leaf images, little bird images in the central section, right? Okay, so other things that the Mughal period has inspired. They've inspired filmmakers from across the decades in India. These are some images from Ashutosh Gowarkar's film Jodha Akbar in 2008. And these are beautiful examples of Mughal-style jewelry that the Tanishq company created for the film. I include them because it took 200 craftsmen 600 days, almost 2 years, to create the jewelry for this film. It's stunning to think about, right? So the kind of handwork that was involved is just the kind of handwork that would have been done in the Mughal period. I should say also that the costumes were designed by Nita Lula, and so she would have directed some of the development of the jewelry design ideas for this film. And the company Tanishq subsequently marketed a Jodha Akbar line of jewelry that has been immensely successful in India. So we're seeing some elements that we've talked about before, right? We're seeing the pearls, strands, pendant elements, decorative elements on the turban, bangles, lots of rings, the predominance of rubies and emeralds. So a lot of the things that we saw historically were utilized in this film. Here's another example. This was also from that film, and this was the jewelry that Jodha Bai wore for her wedding. So Jodha Bai, an actual historical figure, was a Rajput princess. And in Rajasthan, both textile embroidery motifs and jewelry motifs during the period would have emphasized celestial sun and moon and star imagery. So we're seeing some of those things in this jewelry, right? And in the embroidery elements. You'll notice also that from a design standpoint, this is mostly gold and ruby, so it's very warm in nature, right? Compared to how the designer was developing the jewelry ideas for Akbar, primarily pearls and emeralds, that would have been historically accurate and would have indicated a more Mughal heritage. Here are a few examples of the Jodha Akbar jewelry collection. And do you recognize that crescent moon image on the necklace? We saw that in our historical research, right? So there it is. They did really a beautiful job of recreating the motifs of the period in a very faithful way. And there's that example that we looked at earlier, that historical piece. So fashion designers have also been in India, have also been inspired and continue to be inspired by Mughal jewelry and its endless variations. So here we see some bridal jewelry, including the tika, the forehead ornament. There's a side ornament called a jhumka there, a nose ring, earrings, necklace, bangles, a whole variety of elements that came straight out of those kinds of research images that we looked at. I'll just leave you with that thought that the Mughals created this beautiful expression of intricacy, delicacy, and have inspired and continue to inspire designers today. And I'm happy to take questions.